Welcome to Rune Soup, a podcast about magic, culture, and the paranormal, coming to you from Land Down Under. My name is Gordon, and I shall be your host. Enjoy. Today on Rune Soup, we are speaking to writer, teacher, and activist Lasara Firefox Allen. Lasara is the author of Jailbreaking the Goddess, which was released this summer. Lasara, thank you very much for your time.
It's my pleasure to be here. I'm totally excited to talk with you.
Well, I am as well, and not least because if I look at the bio in your latest book, I think you might have a particularly good answer to the traditional first question. Lasara, were you a weird kid?
Indeed, I was a weird kid. I was actually a pretty serious kid. I definitely felt the weight of the world on my shoulders, and I liked standing up for my younger siblings, and I never got into any really big trouble, but I definitely didn't let anybody step on anybody else.
I like it. So the justice has always run strong with you.
Yeah, I have had an overweening sense of responsibility for everyone's well-being for my whole entire life.
And it's my understanding you grew up in a pagan family.
I did. I grew up in a back to the land hippie family that found paganism when I was very young, and so I was raised in multiple enclaves of the counterculture in 70s, 80s California. Well,
are there any particular stories that jump to mind about that? Because that is at significant variance with my regional Australian childhood in a house.
Right. It's at significant variance for most people, most people's upbringing. I'm definitely from a minority group for sure. I was born, this is like an encapsulation of the hippie California dream, I think. I was born in a geodesic dome under redwoods on a commune in the Bay Area in 1971.
Yeah, that sounds like, that presumably will one day be the beginning of a book, but it certainly sounds like one.
Yeah, right. Oh, man. Yeah, that's funny. People have been telling me I should write my memoirs for years, and I'm like, I'm still a young person. I'm not really literally a young person anymore. Technically, I'm 45 now, so I think I'm finally past being a really young person, but I still don't feel ready for the memoirs.
Well, there are cases of people who write 4 or 5 over their lifetime, but who has the time?
I know, right? True. I have a friend who writes, she's just so prolific, and I think she's probably written 4 or 5 memoirs, and they're all fantastic, but Ariel Gore, she actually wrote one of the forewords for Jailbreaking.
She did. I saw that. Okay, so when you say you were raised in a pagan family, was it sort of full-blown high church paganism straight away? Did you get straight into the magic? Were there ghosts? Did you all have spirit animals? Any of that kind of weird, fun stuff that we're all picturing went on past, after the dome?
Right. Yeah, definitely. Back in my early childhood, my mom had not yet found, paganism didn't really exist as it does today. In 71, it was a very small movement at that point. And so my mom's spiritual reality was we were very earth oriented, back to the land. The back to the land ethic is very much about, walk gently on the earth, live gently that others may also, you don't use more than you need because you're trying to be conscious of sustainability and that everyone have access to what, the bare minimum of what's needed, if nothing else. We lived very close to the land. We grew, we had a garden a vegetable garden, and we grew our own livestock, grew and slaughtered our own livestock. We milked goats. We were subsistence living, homesteading. It's a very hard life, honestly. It's not, it's easy to think of it as in some idealized way, but no, it's pretty crazy and also very challenging.
Yeah, and it's become, it's gone from being intentional to a sort of super premium lifestyle option now. I mean, I don't know anyone my age who doesn't want to buy a farm.
Right. And that's true. I think when people think about buying a farm, though, they think about having like hot water already running in it.
Yeah, and the slaughtering animals and how much feces you actually stand in and so on.
Right, right. I mean, people think about, people don't think about, I had no electricity growing up. We had no electricity. We had no hot running water until I was in my teens. We heated our water on a wood stove. We cooked on a wood stove. We had gas lanterns, kerosene and propane lanterns, and candles for reading and cleaning the kitchen and whatnot after dark. And in the winter, there's a lot of after dark. So, and everything was hand built, drafty and a little bit rainy inside sometimes. It was definitely, there's an austerity to the Back to the Land movement that I think is not, when people think about homesteading now, it's not the same thing.
No, you just get one of those Elon Musk solar batteries and you don't have to change your life at all.
Right, you're set. Yeah, you have cell phones. We didn't have phones. We didn't, we had to go to town. We were landlocked for part of the year. It was an intense lifestyle choice. I joke with my siblings that sometimes I'm amazed to this day that we all made it through, knock on wood. But it was a challenging way to live for sure. I was homeschooled through high school. I chose that. My mom would have allowed me to go to high school if I'd wanted to, but I gave it a go and I was like, this is absurd. How does anyone learn in this environment? This is ridiculous. So that was not a good fit for me. So I kept at the homeschooling and kind of an unschooling model, what would be called unschooling now. And then went to university and stayed there for long enough to know that I was proficient and that I, outstripped most of my peers on a lot of fronts. And then I was like, okay, I proved that to myself, and I dropped out. So I'm actually back at school now at 45, completing my bachelor's because I finally decided that it's worth it.
Oh, very cool. When you talk about the unschooling, I think I like that term. I think it's a good one. Was that something? So, did you decide you didn't want to go to school and make your mother teach you, or were there other kids involved in the area that could be unschooled at the same time?
My mother was very committed to homeschooling us and kept us all home. We did short stints for there were a couple of time periods where my siblings and I went to some alternative schools. We were really poor, and so when we did go to the schools, my mom would teach there to pay our tuition. And so she was always involved in teaching us, which I actually am appreciative of this point. At this point, when I had my kids, I was like, "There's no way I'm doing that. That is way too much of a commitment." And for me, and my mom was very much more the traditional mom than I was, which actually, ties into Jailbreaking the Goddess. Like people, when I talk about the idea of the maiden mother crone archetypal system and why it didn't fit for me, I never was that traditional. I wasn't the soccer mom. I wasn't the homeschool mom. I wasn't the bake cookies for the bake sale mom. I mean, I did that stuff sometimes, but it wasn't my identity. I was doing other stuff when my kids were small as well. I never stopped working, and I kept at my career, and so I was working and parenting at the same time, which I think creates and I don't want to say, I don't want to sound judgmental. Parenting is working. So I was parenting working and career working at the same time. And I think that gives the experience of parenthood a different flavor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the book is remarkable for that reason. Male and gay and obviously not married, and all this kind of stuff made me kind of find the threefold model. It didn't resonate with me for a bunch of fairly obvious reasons to start with, but I also kind of thought of it as being silly in the sense that it doesn't. So my mother is a married once mother of three who biologically bears a passing resemblance to this model, but she was also a teacher in regional schools and traveled the world in the 70s on her own, and dangerous and shit places like New York in the 70s when that was crap, and went into court battles with Italian millionaires and all this kind of stuff, and you think, it doesn't even match her, and there's like a biological match, a passing biological match to it, but there's no the mother phase was quite warrioristic. She was doing community activism when we were growing up, because we had like a waste treatment plant nearby that she had to fight them to get the covers put on it and all this kind of thing. And you think, this is not it's remarkable to me, and I think this is what happens when a really good idea's time has come, which is what Jailbreaking is. It's remarkable to me that the discussion went this long without being had.
I know, right? It is pretty remarkable. It really is pretty remarkable. And I don't think that I know anyone who, I mean, my mom is a really prime example, actually, of someone who really is very committed to the threefold model. My mom also is, she's 79. She was one of the outliers of, the hippie generation. She was one of the front end of that movement. She was a social justice activist. All of that stuff was part and parcel for her to being, a very committed mom. And so I see her as a very complex being who has a lot of different energy that she runs, and I'm sure she wouldn't argue that point. At the same time, the threefold model really is a more accurate fit for her than just about anyone that I know. And I think some of that is generational. I think some of that is because she grew up in the 50s. She was coming of age in the 50s, and and so her template was very much painted, with those colors.
I get exactly what you're saying, which sort of brings, this is funnily enough going to be the next question anyway. Where did we get the threefold model from in the first place?
Well, the threefold model, there's a lot of talk about where the threefold model really originates, but many see it as as one of the early elements of the Wiccan movement, which only became formalized in like the 30s. And so it's not like we have an ancient lineage of the threefold model. Like a lot of people think that it's this time immemorial model, but it's actually something that was popularized in the current modern contemporary pagan movement. It's not something that we have from antiquity. The threefold model is not something that existed, for example, in, say, Greek mythology. There were a lot of dyads, a lot of mother and child. And in Egyptian, right, we have the mother and child with Isis and Horus. Like the mother and child is there, but the threefold is not really a thing in most cases.
Well, that's kind of where I wanted to take the discussion, because not only does it emerge around the same time as Wicca, it emerges from an overwhelmingly male antiquarian milieu. Right. So it's sort of mansplaining the goddess into existence. And that's where, it never really resonated with me. A student of history, so I looked at it and said, well, this is silly. And
and it's quite obviously, when we break it down, it is inarguably a product of patriarchy. The threefold model is a product of patriarchy, because that patriarchy is the only thing that conceptualizes a woman based in her utility.
Exactly, and it's a predefined. Do not like, your value is associated with, on a binary level, whether you can do this, but you have no other option.
Exactly. It's not, and the interesting thing has been, of course, the book came out in July of this year, but I signed the contract in February of the year before, and I'd been working on the concept for about a year at that point. And initially, I had been working with a fivefold model and trying to incorporate the maiden, mother, crone as part of it. And so it was maiden, warrior, mother, queen, crone. But I'm an anti-interventionist. I'm not really all about war, as much as the warrior is a flexible model, and I think that we have, the peaceful warrior is an archetype or a model that we definitely use. I don't necessarily think that having the warrior as one of the, it's still a patriarchal model in a sense. Not that it is only that, but it reifies some of what we believe about patriarchy and about power over and those kind of things are embedded. And then also, I'm an anarchist, so for me, a monarchistic model doesn't really make sense either.
There's something in the air about this, isn't it? In Grimoire Land, it's trying to work out how kings work, because there are spirit hierarchies where, and we tend to call them, four kings of directions, being aware that was the political model in the sort of Middle Ages when these books were being put together, admittedly from older sources. And it's fascinating. And in a funny way, it's a good sign that it's difficult now, at least this is my read of it, to even articulate how we want to think about these concepts, because the structure we've inherited, it shows that we are hyper aware that the structure we've inherited is in fact quite problematic, and so in the short term it's going to be complex, and it's not simply a matter of picking another one from backwards in time.
Right, exactly. And, it's interesting because we like to be able to claim that our things come from, forever ago, and that our lineage is unbroken, and et cetera, et cetera. I'm much more about, and, in Jailbreaking from the very beginning, I say, yes, I'm making this all up, and I encourage you to do the same. Like, if I'm saying something and it doesn't land for you, you don't find it useful, or it doesn't feel right, then what does, right? What is your thing that's going to feel right, that's going to make sense, that's going to be useful? And I'm thankful, actually, that my sort of introduction into magic was much more eclectic and much more about that than about learning by rote, or and of course my mom also is, has a lot of credit is due there, as far as like always being allowed, quote unquote, if not encouraged, to follow my own quirk, whatever that was, whatever the thing was that made sense to me, to follow that and to bear it out. And, so I was given a lot of, in all of the hardship and complexity of a Back to the Land youth, I was given certain liberties that other peers don't have, and some of those are a belief in magic and a belief in inherent knowledge and awareness, and like cellular awakening, and the wisdom of our bodies, and all of that stuff. All of that is stuff that was handed to me in some sense, and that I've been able to build on and work with, and a lot of that is why Jailbreaking even exists.
Well, I think that's certainly there on the pages. You touched on something which is going to be another question, given that you have a multi-generational pagan experience. What are your perceptions of what's changed in the American pagan scene over, the preceding decades? Because you got your start young.
Yeah, I think that consent, the conversation that we're finally having about consent, is shifting things, which in a positive direction. I think that the popularization of the movement has positive and negative elements, but I think overall that it's a positive effect. And I think that the awareness about intersectionality that is creeping in around the edges is what gives me hope for the possible continuation and eventual maturing of the movement.
All right, so let's get let's put some flesh around some of those concepts. The first one, what do you mean by the awareness of consent and how that's changed over time? So what are we talking about with consent there?
Okay, so when I was growing up, there was a lot less language. We had, not just in paganism, but in culture in general. We weren't talking about consent in 1990. I turned 18 in 89. And we weren't having the conversation about what consent means as far as sex or expression of any type goes. And because we weren't having those conversations, there was a lot of messed up stuff that was happening. And there's still messed up stuff that happens, but we are having a cultural conversation about it within paganism and outside of paganism. We didn't have the term rape culture in 1989.
Right? Did we even have date rape? Or was that
we just had date rape.
Okay.
Date rape had just come into the lexicon. That was just the beginning.
If you view consent magically, it's interesting. It's sort of it's a pact in an instant ritual space. So I like where you're thinking around that, because it is a kind of there should be an expectation that, and it's a purely magical act, that those kind of discussions happen if they are about sex or expression or whatever they happen to be.
Definitely. And, it would be nice if we could assume that consent were going to be, asked for and honored in ritual space. We can't assume that yet, unfortunately. But the fact that we're at least having the conversation about what does it mean. Do you know of Pantheacon?
Of course.
Okay, so last year there were consent ribbons for hugs or for touch in general. And one said, hugs are oxygen. One said, ask before you touch. And one said something like, don't touch me, or something. I think that's the one I had on. I figure if they know me well enough, they know whether they can hug me or not.
So hug at your own risk. It's kind of like it's like a sign on a gate into a backyard.
Yeah, because we're, our culture is much more touch positive and much more sex positive, hypothetically, than dominant culture. However, there's a lot of confusion about what sex positivity is, I think, for a lot of people. And people, when they first come into a scene that's sex positive, for example, and they haven't seen sex positivity before, they get very confused because they don't recognize the rules. And
True.
So they think there aren't any.
True, and there's also the other side of it, which is if you're coming in and you're unfamiliar with it, you may kind of feel an expectation or pressure to participate beyond where you feel is right for you.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's interesting when I have a. We'll get to the other one because I want to do the intersectionality talk. I have a tendency to view things, and it's kind of like a permaculture or astrological perspective on longer terms. Now, if you think about the ribbons, they're like training wheels on a bike. You could describe them as being objectively silly, but they only need to be used for a couple of years before the kind of ways of thinking and behaving naturalize, and then no one needs the ribbons. Do you know what like we're kind of moving into a world where we have to learn how to have more than a single discussion and more than a single way of relating, and that's kind of my way of bringing the discussion to intersectionality. But what do you think?
Definitely. I think that any opportunities, and there are a lot of different places that I've seen things like this coming into effect. They're important. These games or these, like at gaming conventions, women have created decks of cards. Have you heard about the consent cards?
Doesn't ring a bell. I don't do much gaming, but tell me, yeah.
They're pretty great. I don't do any gaming either, but I'm a consent geek. So I find out about all the weird consent stuff that's going on around the different scenes. I'm not a gamer at all, but I love the idea of conventions. My kid goes to them, my younger kid, and so I do pay attention just in general to consent and education in a general way. And one of the things that came around a few years back was consent cards at gaming conventions, basically, and they are like red, yellow, and green. And you give the cards to people if they have been really excellent to you, or if they've you give if someone's been excellent in talking to you, interacting with you, you give them a green card, and it's like a, good job. And then yellow is like, whoa, you just, near miss, buddy, and then red is like, wow, you just completely offended me. And in those environments, and in paganism as well, I think we have a higher maybe than average element of neurodivergent people. I'm neurodivergent. I think that a lot of neurodivergent people are drawn to paganism. I think that a lot of people who are not, normative in our neurology are drawn to magic. I think a lot of us are drawn to the quirky culture that makes it feel comfortable enough for us to be around people and socialize. And I want all of that to be safe for everyone. And I think that these cards are useful and helpful if people are really actually wanting to improve their social interaction skills.
It's exactly where, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
It's exactly where because I hadn't heard of them, but in my head, you're talking about neurodivergence. There is no better place than a gaming convention to the normals in the outside world that look subjectively silly, and I'm sure I can find on the internet people complaining about it as being silly.
Oh, yeah.
But if you know gamers, you've gamified an interaction that they may be in the back of their heads, particularly the male ones, maybe in the back of their heads, aware that they're probably not doing to a standard that they would like, and you've just given them a competition and gamified how they learn. You couldn't find a better test audience to attempt something like that. And I think you're right. I think the key is matching that behavior to a level of neurodivergence in specific situations.
Absolutely. Well, and of course, the errant element is that there are people who are just assholes.
Yeah.
And they actually, there was a renegade group of like meninists, like red pill. Do you know red pill? Are you familiar with like the term red pill?
Sure.
Like, okay, so the red pill meninist gamer group actually made a game of getting all the red cards.
That's psychopathic, isn't it? That's
yeah, it is.
Just don't participate. Don't participate if you're not interested. Where is the harm?
Exactly. But no, they think it's really funny their whole game is putting women on edge. They don't want women in gaming spaces.
Well, this is a great place to talk about the intersectionality, because I had, who's a fellow Californian, Becca Tarnas, on earlier in the year, and we ended up talking sort of similar stuff about this towards the end, and kind of matching notions. We didn't use the word intersection, but matching notions of intersectionality to the environment and the biosphere, and how if you observe nature for even a single second, increasing diversity is good. Decreasing diversity is like the definition of an ecological disaster.
Right.
And if you look at and that's kind of an example, I think, again, in the longer term, of having more voices than a single monolithic voice is sort of biologically proven to be healthier. And for me, that is my understanding, because I'm a bit too old. I went through communications in the 90s at university. We did, post-colonialism, post-structuralism, and so on, but intersectionalism or intersectionality was less of a term. But
it definitely it existed at that point, but was not being widely used yet. I mean, it came about in the late 80s as a term, and was used because to bring another element of description into the conversation that was already happening as far as post-colonialism and et cetera. Intersectionality is a term that augments that whole conversation.
Well, would you care to throw a definition at intersectionality, Lasara, and we can have the chat?
So intersectionality is the intersections of power, like domination and marginalization. Right? So a person may have multiple intersections of marginalization active at a time, right? And it's also shifting, it's not static. But intersectionality specifically was brought about to talk about basically women of color in a feminist or womanist framework, because sexism does not affect all women equally.
And this is the sort of passing piece that we sort of got. It was a film degree, but communications and so on. The passing piece is because if you look, even if you take it back to suffragettes, the sort of female emancipation has kind of complexified from a class and race perspective, from an initial and probably essential, as in literally no one else could do it, from an essential sort of bourgeois middle class white with some education voice to start with. And I think of people like my mother was literally a bra-burning feminist, and we're Australian, so read Germaine Greer, however problematic she's become in subsequent years. She's still right about Australia, so I still stick with her and her analysis of the home country. But when I think about Germaine Greer, even at the time, you're dealing with someone who is literally going to and then teaching at the second best and second most elite school on the planet. So you see the need for intersectionality as it grows. She certainly, contributed to the conversation, but you're still dealing with a white woman from a position of, you could not get more privilege than kind of teaching at Cambridge. You really can't in that kind of intellectual space. And it's astonishing to me that was the 70s, right? Early 70s. And if you look at how it's only a few decades later, and it seems like we have this new, kind of coming back to what we were saying before, this new mental construct or these new mind tools with which to increase the diversity of voices speaking. Does that make sense? Am I getting it right?
Yeah. Yes, it does make sense. And there's another element, which is that these movements have existed the whole time.
Yeah, true.
These movements have existed the whole time, and the place where we're making room for them is in white feminism and in white consciousness. And as white people, that's our job right now. I really believe that's our job right now, is acknowledging that these movements have been here the whole time, and that we're only just now pausing and taking a breath and being like, oh, wait, we're not the only, as I say in Jailbreaking, I'm not the only center of the universe.
Yeah, other voices can speak, and the red pill gaming thing is the failure to understand the difference between a loss, a recent loss of power, and a historical understanding that that's not the case. It's been that these ones you're not losing. It's that other people can now win at the same time.
Right, exactly. And and so as a white feminist, for example, and I'm not a white feminist. I'm a white person who is a feminist, which would default make me a white feminist, quote unquote, if I were not trying actively working to tear down white centering and white superiority. And the one of the quotes that I'm really liking right now is, you're either an anti-racist or you're a white supremacist. Right? There's not a lot of ground in between. And so, like, because our default setting is white supremacy. And when I say our, I mean everyone's. So
yeah, and the word, and again, this, I just keep thinking of these gamers, and the word is deliberately designed to shock, but that is a perfectly legitimate and accurate way of describing the Anglocentrism of 90% of the world, as on a geographic basis.
Right.
And
it's even to the point. This film, a documentary just came out called 13th. Have you heard about that? It's about the 13th Amendment, about ending slavery, and it's about the prison, how the school to prison pipeline, is the replacement for slavery.
I haven't heard about the film, but I'm completely on board with the idea and the deliberate rise of private prisons and yes.
Well, it's a phenomenal film, and one of the things that is talked about in that film, and that is talked about in, I'm reading a couple of sociology books right now too that are speaking about similar things. One of the things that a term that is used in a class that I'm taking right now is actually the white racial frame, and the idea that culture is framed by whiteness in America, and that there's not a point before where that wasn't the case. There's only a possible point in the future where that may be the case, right? Can't harken back to a pure time when America was great,
Well, this is, because I'm not just white, I'm foreign. So if I look at how the racial discussion is happening, in its positive and negative manifestations over the last few years in the United States, it looks odd on first reading when there'll be an incident like, I can't remember the name of the woman who tore down the Confederate flag off the state building the other year.
Yeah. I can't remember her last name, though.
And because we just, outside of the US, you just get the whole people are, I think it's an obnoxious object, but I assume the argument was, oh no, we need to ban the sale of these objects from Walmart or whatever. And my thought was, well, Walmart can sell swastikas and Confederate flags and be the economic fallout from that on their own heads. I didn't realize this was waving above a state building. It's always and that's monstrous, It's always that extra piece, and there was a great and the sort of what's happening with sports stars kneeling during the national anthem, and then Michael Moore. I thought that's weird. I don't understand what's going on. It's not a judgment thing. And then Michael Moore writes this piece saying, "Have you actually read the next verse of the national anthem, which is about killing slaves that the British were using to help burn down the White House?" And you go, "What? What is happening?" There are some long overdue discussions, it seems, that people outside the US don't have all the details for.
Absolutely. People inside the US don't have all the details.
Well, true.
Unfortunately, that's the truth. And so one of the things that when I say white supremacists, and male supremacy too also is a thing. But the the idea that even people who are non-white, people who are people of color, also inhabit in until we each need to do our own work, basically, and until we do our own work, we're enacting to an extent, the dominant culture. In Jailbreaking, I mentioned that dominant, like the alternative culture is alternative to dominant culture, and counterculture is counter to dominant culture, and that means that our bedrock is dominant culture.
Yes. It's a very good way of describing it. Yeah, you can't not look at it, and that's the sort of and what's good about that, I suppose, is that, as you write about in the book, that there is the which is going to be the next piece. There is the individual work that needs to be doing, and as well as the sort of wider engagement. And there's this quote. Actually, I wrote it down. Where is it? This quote from an Aboriginal group in the 70s in Queensland, which being Australian, I obviously loved it. But if you have come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together.
Yeah.
And that was a truth bomb. I really liked how that was characterized.
Yeah, it gives me chills every time. It's just so precise and so perfectly what needs to be happening.
It speaks to the individual work we've just been talking about, which is that it sounds loud to say white supremacy when referring to the dominant culture, but as we've just discussed, that's kind of, you need to, on an individual basis, get your own head around where you are positioned in that, and as a result, where you are positioned in relation to everyone else. I think it's a marvelous way. If you can, I just sort of read that line over and over, thinking this is a really good way of unpicking how we look at ourselves and different things.
Right. Well, and we have the whole white savior trope as a part of our collective consciousness too, right? An archetype that's played out again and again and again, like Avatar, for example.
Yes.
People love that movie, but it's a standard white savior.
Well, it's I wouldn't even say standard. When I reviewed it and said it was, I don't make a habit of watching racist films, but it's probably the most racist film I've ever seen. And I studied Leni Riefenstahl at film school, who was, Hitler's propagandist. And because it's, the white savior literally wears their skin. Like, not even Kevin Costner did that. I call it Dances with Smurfs, and I think it's worse than Kevin Costner, because he literally wears their skin and becomes their Jesus. It's astounding that it was ever made without someone kind of putting their hand up and going,
problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it's so deeply loved by so many, new agey and pagan-y types. But
that's probably a really good opening discussion to have with them that demonstrates the point you're kind of making, which is, I'm it's that kind of, you're either anti-racist or white supremacist. It's like, I appreciate that you are only hopefully accidentally, dare I say, white supremacist by liking this film, but it's a really good one to unpick what we're talking about. So let's just sit down and talk about your favorite film. You'll feel really embarrassed for all your Avatar posters by the time we're done, but it's a framework with which to begin having those discussions.
Right. Or, the Disney Pocahontas.
Yeah. See, this, like, for me, when we talk about, because I did a film degree, we did speak about the male gaze and the white gaze in the camera and in the history of film. So you have famous in silent movies. You have, and it must have been the most bizarre thing to, if you were an actress, to have done. But they would sort of smear Vaseline on these giant, whirring, loud 35mm cameras, and then just slowly push them until they're about 1 to 1.5 inches away from, like, Bacall's face. And
Right.
that's where you get these kind of slow-moving, elegant. It is a heterosexual white gaze describing America to itself over the first, well, now, but like with the emergence of Hollywood, that's what happened. And so this is where the intersectionality thing came in for us. For me, with film, it's a very good way to have those discussions about this is literally how a country was told to look at itself, and it was through white heterosexual male eyes.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, and that there's actually a school of feminism called difference feminism, and I talk about it in Jailbreaking a bit because it's relevant in the sense that it talks about about woman as other, right? But uses other in a more positive light than we're used to hearing it contemporarily. Not that difference feminism is ancient. It's not ancient. It's, from the 80s and 90s.
Well, that would make us ancient, so hopefully not.
I know, so we're ancient, but it's definitely not a well-known school of feminism. It's kind of out there. And one of the books that is known from that genre of feminism is called The Speculum of the Other Woman. And it's about how, as women, we don't even live in our own bodies. We view ourselves from the male gaze.
Do you know what? I mean, that rings, like, I want to contribute to that, because I'm like, I'm sure it was too long ago, and I took a lot of drugs at university, so I'm like, this exactly sounds like a thing one of my tutors was talking about. But I love that idea. I've been kind of, my experience of that intersectionality, again, of course, is different, but the how we all view our bodies is intersectionally contingent on this white heterosexual gaze that has informed culture, and that's that's a less scary way of saying white supremacy.
Right, exactly, and male supremacy, and that idea, patriarchy. It's all patriarchy in my opinion. So that sense of like, how do we, and this is where it comes back to the spiritual component of Jailbreaking. How do we claim a goddess spirituality for our own selves? Like, how do we inhabit it? How do we live in it? How do we allow it to live in us? How do we actually get into our own bodies while we're still using terms that are not relevant to our actual lived experience?
And what was your solve for that? Well,
the fivefold model is one of them.
So,
certainly.
Which is?
The fivefold model is, so it's not, I'll start a little bit with what it's not. It's not based in biology. So the threefold model, we had talked a little bit about how that is based in utility. And what I mean by utility is basically biology, and biology for, for the manifestation of errors, basically, out of our bodies, that is our purpose. So that predeterminist element of the biological imperative. So that's the maiden mother crone system, because it's based on our uterine capacity. The fivefold model is not. The fivefold model is flexible. It can be applied in a linear or non-linear model, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. And it is self-defined and self-defining. So, and the five phases or aspects are femella. I use Latin terms, and that's problematic in a sense in itself, but also it felt like the cleanest slate that I could get to while still, while we would still have passing familiarity.
Applaud the decision, because it does need to be a bit alien to achieve cut through. So I think that exactly. was a wide move.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so femella, which means child, it means girl child. And that is like the in a fairy, it's Nimue. She's the black heart of innocence. She's like intuition. She's emotion. She's presence. Like she's unbridled curiosity, and like purity is such a loaded term too. I almost don't want to use it, but that innocence, the innocence, like untarnished innocence. Then we have potens. Potens means strength and power and potential. And she's like, I envision her as the leaf busting through the branch, the skin of the branch. She's that beginning point, that second phase of individuation where we're stepping away from our family and into our individuality. And then we have creatrix. Now I chose the term creatrix because it doesn't have the biological imperative encoded like genetrix does and matrix does. Creatrix does not. Creatrix means creator, and she is the creator of books and houses and songs and mythologies and also human life. Then we have sapientia. Sapientia is like sapience. It's knowledge and awareness and skill. She's the scientist, the judge, where potens is the soldier. If we draw the warrior in, she's like the foot soldier, and then sapientia is the general. Then we have Antiqua, and Antiqua means ancient woman. And she is that point beyond knowledge. She's the point where we start turning toward the next passageway.
It's so my backstory with the book, obviously we have the same editor at Llewellyn. We have Alicia, and when she just turned my book into something really, really good, and a smart cookie. And when I was chatting to her about who she's got coming up to be on the show, when she came on the podcast, she said, Lasara Firefox Allen, Jailbreaking the Goddess, it's excellent. And it's okay. And then she tried to describe it to me and got halfway through. This was, most of it was off air. And she's like, I'm not describing this really well. And the book bounced around because I moved from London to Australia at the end of June. So your book went to London, and then it went from London to my parents' place up the coast in New South Wales. And then it finally came here. And then I read it, and the system, like, it is so perfectly named, Jailbreaking the Goddess, because what I find, let me put it this way: I can use half that book. Obviously, I get 50% of personal out of it, which is the exploration of the context in which the fivefold model emerged, because that to me is universal. That's talking about culture and all the things we've been talking about on the show, and then you have this fantastic way of doing that jailbreak. Like the fivefold model is a spell, and I think it's a really brilliant idea.
Thank you. Yeah, it is a spell. It is a spell. It's a magical working, and I like to talk about how with jailbreaking, the concept of jailbreaking the goddess, right? I mean, I believe that the divine is beyond our comprehension, and that we are just interacting with the parts of it that we can grok, that we can understand, that we can get. And I believe that the divine is fluid, and I believe that gods exist at the same time. Just like people exist, I believe that gods exist, but I also believe that we don't exist, right? At some greater undifferentiated level, none of us exist as a whole unto ourselves. We're all integrated. And sometimes we can tap into that larger integration. But while we're actually embodied, while we're actually humans with individual identities, it makes a lot of sense to be able to interact with the divine as its own humanized individual entity. And so this idea of a more flexible divine also makes it possible to offer this model. And so in a sense, what the jailbreak is I'm hoping to offer a way for people to jailbreak their own consciousness.
And to me, I mean, that's a fantastic sentence. Well done, off the cuff description of that. That was very good. Grant Morrison said that the atomic bomb and Superman both began as an idea. So we should have more Superman ideas and no atomic bomb ideas. And there is something about, because at one point they are the same, they're identical. They begin as an idea. So with the fivefold model, because I broadly agree with the characterization of the creator and its interaction with itself / its creation. If that's the case, then Grant Morrison rules apply. And it says we should probably have one that's optimized for both our own expression and the expression of it when it comes to that interaction.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I believe in spirituality as a relational experience. I think that strict individualism is problematic. I think that it creates a lot of misuse of technologies like atom bombs. If we can fully extricate ourselves from having any relationship to anything else, all kinds of awful things are possible. But when we realize that we are not at all distinctly separate from everything else on the planet, and I truly in my core believe that we are not distinctly separate from everything else on the planet, then that kind of atrocity becomes a lot less likely, because we realize that we're not separate from that which we're seeking to destroy.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned in passing there, and we should talk about it, the fivefold model is a time-traveling model.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So there's a nonlinear application, because I believe that we exist on more than one plane at a time. And so the linear format, which is the way that I said it, from Femella to Antiqua, that we have that linear aspect of aging, right? That we age from birth to death. But also, we don't exist strictly in a one-way flow of time for the most part, and our consciousness certainly is not structured that way. So you may be experiencing Femella and Antiqua at the same time interacting in you as you're sitting with an elder who's dying, right? You're sitting and you're being present with the process of Antiqua while reliving your experiences of childhood with this person who's dear to you.
And for me, this is, again, viewing the female experience from the outside, for me, I think this is quite important, because when you talk about the utilitarianism in the threefold model, that's not just uterine productivity, that's ageism as well. That's the piece where it's like, well, I've got my little white heirs to inherit the farm, so you can go and sit over there now.
Right.
And I like the time traveling component of it. It's a further part of that jailbreak.
Definitely. And that consciousness that we can be inhabiting more than one state, even in a moment. That is something that, and I like to preface this by saying that I think a lot is enculturation. I think a lot of it is training. I'm not stuck on the biology versus nature nurture debate, because I believe that there's no way that we'll ever know in our lifetime what is what, as far as that goes, to a large extent.
Sorry to interrupt, because I feel quite strongly about that myself. It runs counter to the interactivity model you were just talking about. If you are inseparable and interconnected, how are you going to turn the bouillabaisse soup back into fish? It's not how it works.
Right. So if we are able to let go, when we say women are this and men are this, for example, that may be true. And if we talk about difference feminism, for example, difference feminism says men and women are different. And, and I would add men and women and people who don't identify as a man or a woman, so non-binary individuals, we're all different. However, that difference is, in my opinion, we can't know what part of that difference is created by our genes and what part is created by our cultural training. Girls are trained from the time they're tiny to pay attention to all kinds of things that are going on in a social setting in a way that boys are not trained. So we have an easier time having multiple conversations at one time, for example, right? The whole women multitask more easily than men idea, that women are oriented in that way, I think is one, a survival strategy. If a woman is walking down the street at night by herself, she is paying attention to multiple things at once.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Right. And if a woman is in a home environment that is not always safe, she's paying attention to multiple things at once. And additionally, girls are also trained to notice the needs of others, because we're caretakers. We're trained to be caretakers from the time that we're born. So because of this, I think that this kind of training actually creates an opening for us to be holding more than one aspect at a time.
I like that. That's a really interesting perspective.
Yeah. So because we're automatically functioning that way. So we might be operating, under sapientia while we're thinking about work, but also interacting with our children at the same time and fulfilling their needs. So we're also in creatrix.
I want to circle back maybe to the consent ribbon metaphor. When we talk about gender and its expression and sort of where we are in 2016, are we still in? It's kind of like the nature-nurture thing. Are we in the consent ribbon phase where we kind of know there isn't? We can track the history of binary gender identity to essentially a post-Northwestern European Christian wrong view of biology, right? So we can picture it as this sort of waist-coated Englishman in the 1800s wandering off on safari view of how the natural world works. Right. But and the fact that that's kind of going away is good news.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Are we in the consent ribbon phase? Like, are we 50 years away from getting gender right? Like, if you look at traditional culture, and when I say right, I mean a more equitable and inclusive way. Because if you look at traditional cultures around the world, they have more than the two genders, and
right.
Even though that still has some shortcomings which can be optimized on, because we're not in the noble savage way of viewing traditional cultures. Is that where we're at? Are we in? Do you know what I mean? Are we in the consent ribbon phase?
I believe that we are, and I believe that my it's very dear to my heart. I personally identify as non-binary to some extent. I identify as female, but I also identify as non-gender conforming. I don't inhabit purely female reality. Whatever that is, I don't conceptualize myself as exclusively female. And I think most people don't conceptualize themselves as strictly binary, if they really think about it. And my younger kid is trans and is non-binary. So I have a front row seat on the evolution of gender identity in this era.
All right, let me ask you a very difficult question then, and it's a guess. It's anybody's guess, but where do you think what does gender look like? Assuming we're all still alive in 2050, what does gender expression look like in the West? Will we settle into a kind of post-scientific version of traditional cultures where we have multiple genders but not a spectrum? The bit I'm concerned that the people who I would be kind of politically in alliance with when it comes to these sort of projects are currently, there's some very anti-scientific or unscientific voices when it comes to gender that I think will do more harm than good in the short term. I view it over the longer term, and we're on the right side of history, so we get to win. But
I certainly hope that by 2050 that we have more flexibility, just like without even thinking twice about it. And I can't imagine that it wouldn't be that way. I imagine that it must be that way, because by 2050, my kids will have had kids and they will be, grown, or growing. Or my older kid will have had kids, because my younger kid is not going to have kids. They're very clear on that. But there's no way that this generation that's coming up now is going to have the rigid gender binary intact in their parenting, for example, that we had to overcome in this generation.
What I also don't want to have, I mean, that's wonderful news. You kind of, I mean, I'm in my mid-30s, so I have encountered overt homophobia and sexism maybe 3 times in my career across 3 countries. I worked in media, so it's kind of young and a bit more progressive anyway. And they were all people who were significantly older than my cohort. So you kind of have this, what I view as encouraging is this sort of demographic wave coming up underneath. And the one that is sort of at my level is only accidentally or structurally feminist. I say only. I put speech marks around that. You know what I mean? We have to take the wins where we get them, right?
Right. Right.
And I see the same thing from a gender perspective from the younger people, teens now, because I don't associate with teenagers. I don't have any, and don't like them.
That's why my kid's not having kids.
There you go. What my risk in the short term is, I think there is more harm than good from what might have been quite a good grenade to throw in the war maybe 10 years ago, which is that gender is a artificial construct. I don't think that idea has legs, and in the same way that I don't think the binary essentialism. One of them they're both really unscientific ideas. And so what I'm trying to speculate is, what does it look like in 2050 where we have our science match our gender expression without denying it?
Yeah, right. I look at it as, like, the terminology that I use to describe it is that sex is hardware and gender is software.
So that's, again, we're in that. Yeah.
That's how I look at it. It just, because gender it is something that's it's more flexible. It doesn't have no rules though. It has rules.
Exactly.
But it's more flexible than our plumbing. But gender is not about plumbing. It's about consciousness, and it's about culture.
So I think certainly by 2050 we'll have those definitions and delineations and intersectionalities obviously firmed up, and I quite like the idea. Sometimes I don't know, maybe because I don't like getting angry on the internet, sometimes I look at some of the things that people are kind of designed to be outraged at, and I appreciate, especially when it's either about you or something you identify with from a tribal perspective that's going on. I just kind of, and when that happens to me, I think we're on the right side of history. By 2050, this kind of stuff will be sorted, and we'll presumably be fighting over something else. And it's, but it's interesting for me. I mean, 35 and being involved in magic and male from the last 20 years to kind of see the beginnings of those discussions on race and class. And like the kind of stuff in Jailbreaking that got us, they were not happening. Those discussions were not happening in like mid-90s chaos magic groups, and they are now.
Certainly not.
So, yeah. Lasara, like, you are to be congratulated on this fascinating book and this fascinating spell for Jailbreaking the Goddess.
Thank you so much, and this has been such a fun conversation. I really have enjoyed it.
Oh, me as well. So for people who want to know more about yourself, where might they go to find you?
Well, they can find me at my website, which is lasarafirefoxallen.com. And there's a Jailbreaking the Goddess tab on the main menu, and there's a lot of interactive stuff there. There's a gallery of user-submitted stuff from across the internet, images of their books and their altars and their journals and whatnot. I also have a quiz up for the Fivefold Goddess, so that if people are wanting to know which direction they're weighted in a given moment, they can go and take that quiz. It's really fun. Personality quiz, basic stuff, but pretty entertaining, and you get to know a little bit more about the goddesses that way. And then also, you can find me on Facebook. I'm super active on Facebook. I recommend following my main profile page and then also my author page, because they have different content at times. And there's also a lot of jailbreaking stuff on Facebook. I also offer workshops and coaching if people want to work with me one-on-one or in a group setting. A lot of my workshops are online. My coaching is online. Pretty much, I live in a very rural area of California, so I do a lot of online stuff because my people are all over the world, literally. So definitely come and find me. And when you read the book, drop me a note. Let me know what you think. Definitely put a review up on Amazon if you're willing, because I love seeing them up there. And definitely get in touch with me and let me know what the book has done for you, how it's affected your practice.
Fantastic. Lasara, thanks again. One of the good ones.
It's been a pleasure. You too. What a delight. Hope to talk to you again soon.
Timely, yes? One might even begin to suspect I have a plan for this show. And even if I didn't, what a fantastic conversation. Personal empowerment, intersectionality, consent as ritual, the world in 2050, and being on the right side of history. I want to leave you with that idea, as it will dovetail with this week's newsletter. Politics and culture interrelate, but they also have their own separate inertia. From a justice goals perspective, things could certainly be better in terms of having, closer access to the legal apparatus. But culture is still separate, still more mutable, and still achieves more lasting effects over the long term. Strategies should be adjusted rather than abandoned. And speaking of things you definitely don't want to abandon, be sure to subscribe to the show in iTunes, your favorite podcatcher, or on YouTube. Join the conversation at the Rune Soup Facebook page, subscribe to the newsletter at runesoup.com, and/or find me on Twitter, where I am Gordon, Gordon_White, WHITE. Until next time.